I'm sharing my screen. Yeah. So we are discussing Spring Boot default starter. Okay. So what are all it is providing with the default starter that we started learning. So the default starter when we create a Spring Boot application without any dependencies, right? By default, it is getting added Spring Boot starter and Spring Boot starter tester with the JUnit and Mockito dependencies for testing library and all IOC library AOP and for logging log4j libraries also it is added. Okay, so you know what all IOC features we have: dependency injection, auto wiring, component scanning, right? And apart from that, reading properties also from properties file, right? To read properties source given with the prefix option. So all that we can enjoy by using this IOC dependencies from Spring Boot starter, from Spring Boot basic starter, default starter. As this is available by default, you can use all IOC features. So mainly, importantly, the IOC features that we need is component scanning, which means all stereotype annotations. Stereotype annotations we can use when we have the Spring Boot starter by default. We can use all stereotypes and we can use auto wiring concept and bean life cycles we can use. Bean life cycles, every bean can have a life cycle method, and we can have event listeners. We can have event listeners. These are not by default available in Spring Core module itself. As the Spring Boot starter providing, all IOC library, right? As this is providing all IOC library by default, you can use all IOC features. Mainly stereotypes, auto wiring concept, bean life cycles, event listeners, and you can read properties via @value or with the prefix option via property source. And we can use profiles also. We can use profiles. We can use profiles. Very important concept. We can use profiles also. All are coming from IOC itself. Basic IOC features only in Spring Boot. Okay. So maybe for this bean life cycles and event listeners, I'll give you an example for each. Okay. And we understand how to read property using @value and key using property source with the prefix option. Also we understand how to read property. We will see profiles. Okay, we will see profiles, very important from Spring IOC. Along with your Spring Boot starter, it is available to you. What is the use of profile? What is the use of profile in real time? What is the use of profile exactly in real time means? Consider you have application, a small use case I will give you. You have application with a database, student management system you are implementing. For the student management system, like you are a developer, okay? So the developer working on his machine, in his local machine or development machine. developer machine. As a developer, he is doing code on developer machine. Okay, usually this is the cycle, right? In real time development, how we do, developer will do on his local machine. In local machine, he will do coding. So he will do coding and basic testing he will perform as a developer. So developer will code and he test. Then he move his code from development environment to testing environment or integration testing environment. So from local to, we move our code to test environment, test machine, testing machine, or you can say testing server. So on this testing server, usually a tester will perform the testing here, a tester will perform testing here. They will do both the black box or white box testing. Usually black box testing tester will perform all performance testing or use case testing. Everything he will perform testing here. A tester will perform testing here. Same application only. We put same application code only. We just forward our code to next environment. Think from the code point of view. As a developer, you developed this code and you are just moving your code from one environment to another environment. Once tester done with his testing, if you say okay, if you say okay, your code is good. If you say it's okay, your code is good. For what we are discussing all these to understand about profiles. Okay. So if you say okay, we will move this code to UAT. Okay, we can call it as UAT. This as SIT, system integration testing. This you can consider as a dev machine. So the same code will be moved to UAT, user acceptance testing. Here business will test. Business people will test. Business people will test here. Your scrum master or your product owner who is from business, they will test. So developer tester may be from the same organization. They will say, okay, my code is done without proper development or testing. If that code moved to production, there are chances to get many bugs. So that's why business will not allow our code directly from testing environment to production. In production, actual end user will start using your code. So before that, business also will perform some testing here. They will verify each and every use case whether as per their expectations this code has been implemented or not. They will verify properly. Then if everything okay, then they will allow us to deploy this code to production environment. Okay, this code will be allowed to deploy into production environment if everything is okay. If any stage if code is not okay, that code will be reverted back to developer. So bugs will be raised, then developer need to check that bugs he need to fix, then he need to follow same cycle again. It need to move to testing, tester again need to test, then it need to move to UAT, then finally it will go to prod server. So prod will be for end users. Actual end user will start use your application from the prod machine. And sometimes there is a continuity of business mission also, that is also like a production. Okay, so one more copy we will run on COB, continuity of business. In case if production server goes down, as a load balancer, we can't call it as a load balancer. You know, usually monolithic applications, continuity of business. used to deploy into one more server in case if production have any failures or if production goes down for the maintenance, right? During that maintenance, COP server also end users will use. So that automatically request they will configure via router. Always it will go to prod. If prod is down, it will go to COP. Both will connect with same database so that they don't see any difference. Okay, same code. They'll maintain one more server, COP, continuity of business. In case prod, in case of prod go down, then COP will be used by end users. So this many environments usually we will maintain for any application. Usually we'll maintain this many environment for any application which is monolithic or a microservice also. Okay, usually we will maintain this many environments. Now as a developer or as a student, what we are doing now, we are creating a application in our local, we are creating our application in our local, and we may upload this code to Git is a repository. Okay, in general we don't start code in our local directly, we get the skeleton from repository. As a developer, what you will do, let's say if I am your lead, what I will do, I'll create one repository in or bitbucket git or bitbucket somewhere. I'll create a repository SMS without any code, right? And I'll ask you, let's say one of you want to develop this, or all of you want to develop this each module. What I will say, I'll ask everyone to create a branch here. For this SMS, I'll ask everyone to create a branch for each task. So for task 1, let's say Vasu want to develop, so I'll ask Vasu to develop task 1 and create your own branch here, task 1 branch. So he need to create task 1 branch. From there he need to pull his code. And task 2 want to develop by task 2, Shravani want to develop task 2. So then I'll ask her to create one more branch and I ask to pull the code from her branch itself. So you need to create your own branches for each task, then you need to pull the code, then you need to work on your module. Once your module working is done, right, work is done, you need to move your code again to your branch. From your branch to you will move to main branch. While moving it to main branch, you will ask your team members to validate your code or review your code so that everyone will perform a review on your code. If everything went well, it will be merged to main branch. Once code is moved to main branch, for deployment purpose, we will create some other branches also here. We will create many other branches. Let's say for testing, I may create one SIT branch, for UAT branch, for production prod branch, for COP branch. Like that, I may create multiple other branches. For what? For code promotions. You developed your code on this particular branch and you pushed your code to main branch. Now from there onwards, I want to do the deployments. So what I need to do, I may need to move to SIT environment, same code, so that that code will be automatically deployed into SIT branch. If I use CI/CD, CI/CD automatically will recognize your code changes, or we will put a trigger file like YML file changes, something triggers we give. So based on that CI/CD, Jenkins will recognize your action and immediately it will deploy your code into SIT server. Okay, once SIT is done, same code I may move to another branch, UAT, from their prod, from their COP, then it will deploy it into respective servers only when I move to that particular branch. That's how I'll configure it in CI/CD. In CI/CD, I will give configurations like that. Okay, when the code is from UAT, I'll ask CI/CD team to deploy that into so and so UAT machine, and if it is in production, I'll ask them to deploy it into prod. That's how they will configure that server information. Server is nothing but again a machine, right? So they need to configure that machine and in which folder your code need to be placed. That all they will configure. That all they will configure. Now coming to coding, you have imagined your code that it need to work in your local and you developed it. Now the same code, if I move it to testing environment or UAT environment, prod or cop, will that execute as you expected? We don't know whether it will execute or not. The reasons are, while you developing your code, you may connect it with your local database for a simple use case I'm giving, right? Lot we can imagine similar to that, but a simple use case. Here you have, in your mission itself, you have local database or else a database that is for only developer, right? For developer, one DB instance for developer they have given you. So you are using that developer DB instance properties in your application. Consider database DB name, URL, username, password. That all belongs to dev database you have configured or you have coded into your application as a developer. Now, when the same code move towards testing environment, when the same code move towards the testing environment, it should not connect with. In your code, you have written, or in your code, you have a properties file like application properties. Under that properties, you have configured only dev database properties. Dev database properties you have configured in your application properties file. Now, how your application, if it move to testing environment, how it can connect with the testing database? Based on environment, your code dynamically should able to pick up SIT database. If it is in prod or UAT, it should pick up UAT database. If it is in UAT, your code while starting, it should use UAT database only. If it is in SIT, SITDB. If it is in prod and COB, maybe if you want to use same DB, they need to connect with prod DB. Where this differentiation I can show to my application, where do I configure them? Let's say if I ask you to maintain this many properties, you may need to have, or you may need to write lot of logic based on the environment. You don't know, when you deploy your code, then only you will be going to know on which environment your code is deployed. Maybe lot of configurations you may require to understand which environment you are using. So without this profiles concept, if I try to configure it, maybe you need to write a lot of code to understand on which environment this is deployed, and for that particular environment properties you need to segregate. During application startup, if else conditions you need to write. Then there you need to configure different set of properties. So lot of logic you may need to write. So now here, if I use profiles concept, what I can do, you need not to do much configurations. Okay, across all your environments, same code will execute, but it can differentiate your database server. Not only database server, let's say in dev environment, you have some properties, you want to change that properties when you move it to SIT environment, or you want to change that properties in UAT, prod or COP. So for environment specific, you can create a separate properties file that automatically will be recognized by your server, which means not only app properties, you can create multiple properties, application properties. App stands for application here, okay? Not only application properties, for each environment you can create one more separate properties file with the environment extension. Let's say for development you want a properties file. You can create application dot properties, or what you can do in application dot properties, common properties you can put across all the environments. I want to use this file. Okay, fine. All environments common configuration you can put here. All environments common configuration you can put here, and environment specific properties you can put it into -dev. So put your environment name dot properties for SIT dot properties, system integration testing. For UAT dot properties, prod properties, and pop. Same application file name you can use with the environment extension. With environment extension with the hyphen minus your environment name. You can put your environment name dot properties. What will happen if I configure like this? Okay, let's say application common properties, in the sense, let's say some date I want to configure, or some um, properties I want to configure that are common across, maybe some dates or some inputs that are common, maybe common configurations I'll put here. Okay, so my application need one default date. Maybe I'll give that default date, maybe some for calculation purpose. Okay, I want to give default date or maximum date. What I can use means, maybe I will give like this 31st 12 999. That is a maximum date, or this is my date format. Maybe this is common for all environments. I configured that key into application properties. Now coming to database URL, username, passwords are different. For dev environment, DB URL is different, username, password are different. I'll keep it into development properties. I'll keep it into dev properties file, SIT properties into SIT, UAT properties into separate UAT file, prod and corp into separate files. So for each environment, you can maintain different set of database properties. Now the question is, you have implemented same application. All these properties are being part of same application only. All these properties are being part of same student management system application only. Now, how my application will decide it need to use the dev properties only if it is running in my local, or how it will recognize SIT or UAT or prod or com. So generally, right, Spring Boot applications, we learned that finally once we develop this code, we will convert this code as a jar file, sms.jar. We'll convert this code as a jar file. Okay, jar file. Whoever it is, CI/CD or you, whoever generate your jar. Once you push your code to Git, from there when you move your code to SIT and when you ask CI/CD to deploy, CI/CD will read your code first. It will read your complete Maven code. All the Maven build configurations they used to be configured here. It will do Maven build. It will execute again Maven build, like how you perform in your local, right? Maven clean install. Same command it will execute. It will build your code first. So out of the build, what we will get? A jar file. Out of the build, we will get always a jar file. We'll get a jar file or a var file. Generally, we use a jar file. So one jar file will be generated. One jar file will be generated. Now this jar file CI/CD need to place it into your server. It will place it into your testing machine. While placing into testing machine and while starting this, right, this jar also it will start. CI/CD only finally it will execute a command. Once it plays your code right, it will execute the Java jar command. Once it move to each environment, CI/CD will execute this Java space hyphen jar space SMS dot jar. It will execute your jar command. It will execute your jar command always. So when it execute Java space jar, it will call main method from your jar file and it will run that main method class. Means your Spring Boot application will start here. While doing this, we can pass some runtime arguments also here. Spring dot profiles dot active or Spring active dot profiles. So here we need to give the profiles, which profiles you want to activate for that particular environment. If it is in local, you can give tab. If you are running your application in SIT, you can give this SIT while running it. UAT, prod or cop. Like this we configure profiles. Like this we configure profiles. Where these profiles will be configured? This profiles configured into your each environment. In each environment while deploying, right? CI/CD will configure that command in their Jenkins pipeline, right? They will configure these commands or they will ask us to give this input field. This one we can pass it as a runtime argument. This is a runtime argument for jar. So as a runtime argument, this profile input will be given to your SMS jar application. In this application, which class will read this? Your main method class only. Always we are writing a main method class here. This class only will read this arguments, whichever argument you pass, right? That argument will be given here. Who internally starting this or what will start by default when you call Spring application.run? Your IOC will start. Application context AP equal to new class path XML application context will be executed internally. That application context will read this argument also. Which argument? This profile argument. Dev or SIT or UAT or prod, whichever input you have given, it will read. So based on that, it will go to this resources properties file and it will pick the properties which is having same argument extension. As you are creating multiple properties files with the same names, this profiles names and your properties file names should match. In your properties files, you are using some extensions here. These extensions and your input while running this jar command need to match. So usually from where we pass them means using CI/CD we pass it. If you don't have CI/CD, if you are doing direct deployment, you can do using the simple jar command. You can deploy it. Any application, right? In AWS, EC2, or your virtual computer, wherever you want to run this Java command. Run this Java command. If you have Java software in your particular environment, that is enough. Place your jar file into that particular machine and run this jar command. So it will start your application. It will start your application. While running your jar command, if you want to decide or if you want to tell your application, you need to read your particular environment properties file, you need to give that properties extension here. We call it as profile. We call it as profile. I'll give one basic example. Easily you will understand. Okay, easily you will understand here. I'll create one more application here with the default starter only. I'm not going to use any additional configuration. Just default starter is sufficient. Create a Spring Boot starter application, Spring Boot starter project. I'm creating SMS application with profiles. Next, I'm not adding anything. Just finish. This concept is not tricky until unless you apply. Okay, so simple concept only, but important. Okay, now I have default properties file and one application here. Okay, as you know how to read values from properties file, right? As you know how to read properties from properties file, I'll create one simple controller. See, basically we use properties for database such configurations. Okay, we use database, we use properties, application environment properties file for describing different set of database configurations, or you may have different Kafka. Let's say if you are using message queues for dev, you may have dev Kafka configuration for SIT configuration, UAT. You may have different set of other applications need to be integrated. Okay, so based on environment, you can configure that environment specific properties into each profile. Okay, I'm giving an example of database as you can understand easily, right? So now here I'm giving a simple controller just to read a property and show you. Okay, profile controller, a REST controller. Oh, to use REST controller, I need web dependency. Okay, let me make it service. Service. Here I want to read a property. Private string. In application properties file, if I have anything here, right? If I have anything here in application properties file, let's say if I give a property a message which is common to everyone, message, hello, this is common property. So this is common property. This message key with the common property in application properties file I have. Let me rename it profile service string, that message I want to read here using at the rate value. If I can give key here, that value will be reading here. Right? If I put a method public void print data system.out.println message. So for this common property, I need not to do anything. If I use simple value and if I give key, automatically it will come here and I can use it, which is common property. Okay, so I can get my that method here and I can see which property it is reading. Application context dot get bean profile service profile service dot print data method. So just a property I am reading and printing it. Hello, this is common property. So it is able to reading it. Now environment specific property file I want here. So this command, based on this command, based on this profile command, it need to pick that property from that particular environment property file only. So I'm creating application hyphen dev dot property. Okay. So here I'll create one more property or one more message. Hi, key is hi from dev environment. Just imagine this like a your database configuration. So hi is the key and hi from dev environment. I'll create same way multiple other environment properties files. Sit.properties, uat.properties, prod.properties, pop.properties. Hi from pop environment. Key is same. Properties are getting changed. Hi from prod environment. Hi from SIT environment. Hi from UAT environment. So based on environment, this hi message need to be read. It is not under default properties file. It is environment specific property. Message is a common property. That's why I configured it in application properties file. The remaining message or the remaining hi is not from the common properties. It is a specific properties file. So that specific properties file hi I want to read here. So the hi message. The key is hi. Now here I'll print it. System.out.println hi. So just I created multiple properties files with the different messages and I configured it. Okay. If I see here, it is saying I don't find hi message. It is saying you configured hi, that is good, but there is no hi property in your properties file. It is not able to find this hi value. Could not resolve the placeholder. There is no hi message. Because by default it cannot able to pick any properties apart from your common properties file. So you need to tell your application that pick some profile. Okay, here you have one configuration. So there are many ways to pick the properties file. So here we have one property spring.profiles.active. Via this property you can tell which environment you want to pick. In common properties file you need to put that. So I gave spring.profiles.active equal to dev. Then Spring will understand, okay, he is using profiles. There must be one more properties file with minus dev. I need to pick that properties file. It will understand. So now if I run this, hi from dev environment. Hello from common property. Hi from dev environment. It is able to read. Now I am changing the environment from dev to SIT. Now same code I will run. Now this time it is picking hi from SIT environment. Now UAT. So in whichever environment you are deploying, before deployment, if you change this property, right? If you change this property, then automatically when CI/CD pick up, it will understand which property file it need to read. So that environment specific properties only it will read from your properties file, UAT properties file. If you want to run prod profile, you can give here. So now your code will pick prod properties only. This is how environment specific properties files also we can configure. And not only by giving this command, not only by giving this command from properties. So maybe if you feel that every time I don't want to go to this application properties file and I don't want to do this configuration, fine. If you don't want here, let's comment it. I want to do this configuration while running my jar file itself. That also you can do. What you can do, Generally, if you convert it into jar, this is the command java hyphen jar, then we will run that. If you want to run it from your ID itself as a runtime argument, you can pass here run configurations, go to argument, here you can pass program argument, same thing hyphen hyphen spring dot profiles dot active is equal to give your required environment name, play and run it. Hi from SIT environment. Where did I given? Not given in properties file, but I have given in run configurations while running this profile application, right? Under argument section as a program argument, runtime arguments. In day one of your core Java, you must have learned. So I given as a runtime arguments profile spring dot profile dot active equal to SIT. Straight away that argument giving to your spring application dot run method, so that it is able to understand which properties you wanted to read apart from your common properties file. So your application can decide which properties files you want to read, so that that particular properties only it will read. Not only that, okay, not only that, apart from properties, you can have different beans also here. Maybe consider I have a bean class. I'm creating some configuration bean. One config bean I'm creating my config bean at the rate configuration. Okay, I'm not writing any code in this one. I'm not writing any code in this one. System.out.println. This configuration bean I want to execute only for SIT. Only for SIT. Only for SIT this config bean I want to execute. Or consider make it common. It's okay. My config bean only for SIT I want to execute. So in such scenario also you can configure profile here. I have some beans, that beans I want to execute a particular only for particular environment only. So this bean object will be created only for SIT when your profile is SIT. So lot of classes I have in my application, but few classes I don't want to execute, few classes I want to execute only for my environment only. In that case, if you configure your environment name here, if I run this application for SIT, then only that bean will be created. Now profile is SIT, right? If I run this class, whichever bean I have configured, only for SIT bean that is created. Now if I go to my run configurations and if I change it to SIT to UAT, I can see these messages, but your bean object is not created. Because via profile you strictly telling to your IOC that execute this bean only for SIT profile. So for only SIT it will execute. And apart from that, I have one more bean. I mean, which are all places that you can use your profile. Okay, that we are understanding. One more bean I am creating. Okay, profiles bean configuration. I am doing something. Profile bean config. Again, a configuration class. Here I have some at the rate bean methods. Public date, create date, at the rate bean date equal to new date return date. And this bean I want to execute only for a particular environment. So here also you can configure profile and you can give your profile name. So that this particular bean will be created only for SIT environment. For UAT I want a different date concept. UAT date. Maybe for UAT I want to create a different concept to create this date. Something calendar dot is there any date method. Okay. Calendar dot get instance dot get time. So I want to create a date using a different concept. This is for SIT and this is for UAT. And yeah, similar to this, for each environment, generally if you are configuring profiles, for each environment you may have different set of configuration. Create prod. I'm just giving an example. Maybe you may not find such a use case, but you can apply this whenever you require, right? A particular environment being only you want to create, you can create it. Dev profile, create dev date. Why this one for it? Year, month, date. So year, month, date. Okay. So just consider for each environment I want to create a specific B dates. At the rate beans also I want to create for each specific environment. Now if I run, here I have in run configuration, the profile is UAT. So UAT date only will be created. UAT date created and high from UAT environment. If it is SIT, for SIT we have one more additional bean also, the configuration class itself, having profile on class level. For SIT only configuration class, SIT date, high from SIT environment. So this is how you can maintain environment specific properties using profiles, right? For each environment, you can maintain environment specific properties like your database configurations. When you change your environment to another environment, if your database is different, you can configure environment to database specific properties, and you can have environment specific class itself altogether. Environment specific class itself. On top of class also you can use profile. On top of each class, any class. It can be your controller or service or DAO configuration, whichever class it is. On top of at the rate bean also you can put this. On top of at the rate bean also you can put this, so that that particular bean will be executed for given environment only. And how I can tell which environment I am using? You can tell your environment name via this Spring.profiles active, the profile name here from your common properties file. Common properties file by default it will load application properties. So that if I supply this property from common properties file, it can understand. Okay. So and so specific environment you wanted to execute, so that I need to pick that particular properties file. Or else you can tell that while running your jar command in CI/CD, you can configure this property hyphen spring profiles dot active is equal to dev or sit or uat. By configuring it, you can tell which environment you wanted to use. As a runtime argument also, you can pass it here as a runtime argument. This is runtime argument only via jar. If you are running in IDE in your local, right, for testing purpose, you can use argument section, pass it as a program argument, and this argument also can be, it can be read, and it will tell that IOC read SIT properties which are having SIT extension. Okay, so this is how environment specific properties we can configure. Is it clear? We will do a application, okay, later. Okay, we'll do end-to-end application. You will get it. In one of my recent application, we used it in a different way. Okay, now I'm giving you simple DB example, right? There we used it in a different way. We have application, and that application having 4 countries code. So for 4 countries, we have 4 different servers. So when I deploy my code into a country specific, let's say for India specific, my code want to execute, I configured India properties with the hyphen India. So during execution, I am giving runtime argument as a India, so that India properties only it is picking up. So if it is for US name I need to give, for UK name, for German, like that. For country specific, for 4 countries we designed the code. So to reduce the load, right, initially this profile was not set up, so that what was happening, all the objects it were creating, all countries code objects it was creating, it is putting unnecessary load. So then I proposed this profile solution, then we reduced burden, right, by almost 1 by 4th. Only country specific code only now we are executing using that profiles concept. Okay, I'll explain you that use case later. Tomorrow we will see logging. Okay, logging, default logging is available, right? How we can use that logging, default logging, right? How to use, how to configure logs. Okay, that is again very important. Okay, when you developing your code in Azure environment or GCP or AWS, you need to configure your cloud log server details in that logging configuration. I'll show you tomorrow. Okay, default logging is available.